Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is me, Dr. Ibrahim Shinnawi, welcoming you to our course Modern Drama, and this is lecture number 6. And in this lecture we are going to continue what we have already started in the previous lecture about giving the story in brief of our play under study, A Doll's House. And after we stopped in the previous lecture with Helmer sending a letter of dismissal to Krogstad, and we are waiting, as we said last time, for the reaction of Krogstad after receiving this letter of dismissal. Now Krogstad's second visit and his fresh threat to Noura. Dr. Rank now goes away into Helmer's study, while Krogstad comes to have a private talk with Noura. Krogstad has received the letter of dismissal, and he now comes to settle the whole thing with Noura and to get her help. He is desperately anxious to keep his job at the bank, and so he tells Noura that in case she does not help him to retain his job, the consequences of her and her husband would be very serious. He has brought with him a letter addressed to her husband. He has stated in this letter all the facts about Noura's transaction with him and about Noura's having forged her father's signature. He now tells Noura that after having suffered the loss of his reputation by his criminal act of forgery, he had now decided to lead an upright life in order to reestablish his good reputation, but that her husband was now often bent upon dismissing him and thus ruining his plan to reform himself. He says that now he does not simply want to retain his job, but that he wants her husband to promote him to a higher post so that in course of time he can become the most important official in the bank. In case she does not manage this, he would hand over the incriminating letter to Helmer, and then both she and her husband would find themselves in trouble. Noura tells him that he is in position to help him. She admits that she had even thought of committing suicide because of the complication that he has created in her life, but he tells her that suicide is not something easy. Krogstad then goes away, but before going, and this is very important, before leaving here, he drops the letter which he had brought with him into Helmer's locked letter box. Noura feels that very soon Helmer would come to know all the facts about the loan and the forgery, and that she would then be in real trouble. Mrs. Lindy's promised to help Noura. Mrs. Lindy, who had been all this time mending Noura's fancy dress in another room, has now completed the job, and she comes to hand over the costume to Noura. By this time, Mrs. Lindy has also been able to judge that it was from Krogstad that Noura had borrowed the money. Noura now admits to her that she had forged a signature on the bond which she had executed. Mrs. Lindy promises to speak to Krogstad and to prevail upon him to withdraw the incriminating letter. Now Noura says that something miraculous is going to happen. What she means is that if Helmer comes to know that she had forged a signature, he would take upon himself the entire responsibility. But she's mistaken in this belief. Noura's intention to commit suicide. Mrs. Lindy goes away to meet Krogstad while Noura begins to rehearse the tarantella in the presence of her husband and Dr. Rank. Noura's effort now is to prevent Helmer from opening the letter books as long as possible, so that Mrs. Lindy gets enough time to speak to Krogstad and prevail upon him to withdraw the letter before Helmer reads it. Now, after a little while, Mrs. Lindy returns and informs Noura in a whisper that Krogstad was not available because he had gone out of station and would return on the following day. Noura now makes up her mind to commit suicide. So Noura thought of committing suicide after giving her dance performance at the fancy dress ball on the following day. She inwardly calculates that she has now about 31 hours more to live. She has decided to commit suicide for two reasons. First, because Helmer would now come to know that she had borrowed money and that she had forged a signature. Second, because Helmer, on coming to know about her criminal act of forgery, would take the entire responsibility on his own shoulders. Noura does not want that Helmer should be put in a position in which he has to perform such a great sacrifice for her sake. Noura does not want that her husband should take upon himself the responsibility for what she had done. The best course under the circumstances would be for her to put an end to her own life, she thinks. Mrs. Lindy's offer of marriage to Krogstad. Mrs. Lindy had left a message for Krogstad when she had gone to his lodging to have a talk with him about the complication which he had created in Noura's life. Krogstad now comes to see Mrs. Lindy at the Helmer's apartment in response to Mrs. Lindy's message. Helmer and Noura are at this time attending the fancy dress ball in the flat upstairs. Now, Mrs. Lindy is alone with Krogstad. First, Mrs. Lindy explains to him the circumstances under which she had been forced to terminate her relationship with him and to marry another man. She tells him that she had to look after her ailing mother and her two younger brothers, and that it was necessary for her to marry somebody rich enough to enable her to look after them.